Welcome to On the Offense, everybody, where we typically take a topic of note, often something that's in the news, and digest it through the lens of marketing and/or communications. Believe it or not, this is episode, Jeff, number 23.
Yes, 23.
23, meaning,
Big number.
yeah, big number. And we do these twice a month. So that means we've been at this for about a year, which is beyond crazy. Um, and every third episode or so, we like to invite a guest or two or three. We've done one guest, we've done two. I think we had a panel of three guests, so a panel of five, including.
We did. That was a robust broadcast. Yeah.
Um, that was a robust broadcast. And this is one of those times. Look at that smiling face. So I am really, really excited about today's guest. She is not only an ex-colleague of mine from Hill and Knowlton back in my agency days, and Jeff is ex-H&K as well, but she is also a highly decorated expert in the area of media relations, having experienced a long and exciting career in the agency biz. So Lisa Kovitz, welcome, welcome, welcome. The pride of Ossining, New York.
That's me.
Tell
That's
us about
right.
yourself, and then we can get into the topic at hand.
Yes. Well, John and Jeff, very nice to have our H&K reunion over Zoom. Who even would have imagined that when we were working together in the 1980s? So I worked in at all agencies, so all the big ones, H&K, Burson Marsteller, which is now just Burson, and Edelman, and then a few small ones in between. And the entire time I did it, my job was to take, oh, and I was a book publicist too. That's how I started, is to take something that the client cared about, the author cared about, the company cared about, and make it famous by getting it press coverage. And of course, things have changed a whole lot. And this medium we're on didn't exist until sometime, I think in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I am reminded that Adam Curry of MTV fame, a VJ,
Yeah.
was the first person to do a quote unquote podcast.
Oh, really?
That's correct. I might be wrong on some of the history on that, but he calls himself the Podfather. So, so,
That's
so,
great.
and he, it was, I think certainly the Apple app did not exist until much later on. And as we were talking about in the green room, is that Mark Maron's podcast, WTF, started in 2009, and he just concluded this past Monday. And I remember reading about it in the New York Times. And then, like, I had a tiny little iPod and I had to take a cord, put it in that, put it in my computer, and manually sync every episode. And then somebody figured out that they should put it on the iPhone. And that's when we went from it being this thing that nobody understood to now everybody has a podcast, including Barack Obama, who was Mark Maron's last guest. He
Right.
has a podcast with Bruce Springsteen. So anyway, so that my job is, and I started as a book publicist. And in fact, if it paid better, I probably would have stuck with it. Because but no, I'm serious. My very first job, I was actually telling somebody today, I made $8,000 a year. It was in 1981, and I worked for a very small publisher called Stein and Day that was actually located in my hometown of Ossining, New York. And one of the books that I worked on was the sequel to Ball Four, Jim Bouton's Ball Four,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
Right.
remember that, right?
Absolutely.
And at the time, Jim was also, I think, in between sportscasting jobs. And one of the important things for him to do was to do not only sports press, but to be on talk radio, because talk
Mhm.
radio was a thing. And this is 1981. And it
Mhm.
was kind of before there was national talk radio shows. So you literally had to call radio stations all over the country to promote books. And should I keep going? Because yes.
Yes, this is great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's up to
Well,
you.
so the notion of a book tour you may know this too, is that the novelist Jacqueline Suzanne originated the notion of going on the road
Mm,
to promote her novels and also to go on the multiple talk shows that existed when her books were published. So Merv Griffin, it was Johnny Carson. She would go on Johnny Carson. Then came Phil Donahue,
mhm.
right? So that changed it. And I can tell you for a fact, the second publisher that I worked for, getting somebody on Phil Donahue, 50,000 copies of that book would sell the next day.
Wow.
Because think
Wow.
about it, CNN had just started.
Right.
And so the notion of sort of, very schism of the media environment wasn't happening. There was, the morning shows, which I think the Today Show was on Good Morning America had just started and CBS had something maybe,
Mhm.
So the notion of the book tour is not only would you do the national like late night talk shows or Phil Donahue or Merv Griffin or Mike Douglas.
Mike
Mike
Douglas.
Douglas,
Mike
fascinating.
Douglas, right? Who
Philadelphia. Yeah.
Roger Ailes, as in the creator of Fox News, was Mike Douglas's producer.
I did.
So you did so this we're giving John and Jeff a lot of useless history. But anyway, so then you would also get on an airplane and go from city to city and do Good Morning Detroit, Good Day LA, right? Like those shows developed because there had to be something in between the Today Show and the soap operas. So that's where the local talk shows happened. And then you would also take those people to radio stations. And I am proud to say I took two different authors to Terry Gross, now been on for over 30 years as the host of Fresh Air on NPR.
Oh yeah.
And you had to get in we went to Philadelphia, you drove to the NPR station, and then she just sat in there with you. She no longer sits she probably hasn't done it in years to sit in the same room with you. But I remember taking two different authors there, and it was just like, okay, you're in Philadelphia. And then it became Fresh Air. And that is a very important place if you want to sell books,
Mm,
as you might imagine. So yeah, so I learned, so if you can like, and my theory of the case was if you can look at a book as a product, because they kind of were being sold at the time like that, right? That's when book publishing was an enormous industry at that point. I could work in PR for a product. So I
mhm.
went from getting paid $8,000 a year to making $16,000 a year. And then when my first PR job was a small agency that had some really great clients. They had Sharp Electronics and things like that. And and I was the microwave oven girl for Sharp because nobody knew what a microwave oven was, John and Jeff. So somebody had to explain it. So that's what I did. And I part of my job is to kind of keep track of the changing media landscape. So, what worked in 1981 to sell books is not going to work in 2021 or 2025 to sell books. So now social media, book talk, really important, right? But podcasts, which we're on right now, um, is kind of a way for an author to reach a very large or very small niche focused audience. This voice is in your ears, right? Like, well, I guess we're on Zoom and on YouTube, but it started as audio only podcasts, right?
Mhm.
And it was literally called podcast because of the iPod. Right. So what's good for authors and why it's important is because you're reaching a super targeted audience or a mass audience, depending on who you are, what the book's about.
Mhm.
And it's evergreen. So if your topic isn't a breaking news topic, you could listen to it a month from now and nothing would have changed. The book is still the book. You'd like it on day one, like Phil Donahue to sell 50,000 copies, but that doesn't necessarily happen. And some people, now that podcasts live mostly simultaneously audio only and on Zoom, discovery is a lot easier on Zoom if you consider it, right? Because it's Google, the people who invented search. So it's a lot easier. And many people, whether they're 15 years old or 50 years old, don't watch them. They listen to them. They have it
Yeah.
on in the background,
Yeah.
And I think if your subject matter is parenting or health, there's a podcast for you. And books are important because your content has been vetted by editors. I mean, unless you're self-published, and then who knows, But the thinking is that as it was in TV talk shows, it was a lot easier for me to book an author than someone who's working for a brand. And it's weird, right? Because a book is still a product,
Yeah.
but you know, the idea of someone saying Pepsi 7 times in an interview isn't great when you could be charging Pepsi for those ad
Yeah. Good,
dollars, right?
good point.
So doing podcasts, you can sit in your house all day and do it. And, people still do radio tours, which is also using Zoom, not on video, but the audio is so much better. And that still happens for books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's way more efficient than putting people on an airplane.
Oh, yeah.
It's intimate in that it's, if you have your headphones in, even if it's on Zoom, it's just for you. And if you care about the subject matter, you're going to listen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Lisa, again for coming on to our podcast. It's great to have you here. It's always great to have John here with me for sure. But anyway, no, we talk about media relations and PR all the time. And if you go back to the beginning of our careers back, how many years ago? 20, more than that. God, 30, whatever. It's a long time ago. And, things have changed so dramatically. Every town had one or two newspapers. Every town had, three or four television stations. Um, there was some news radio, but and national magazines and what have you. The atmosphere today is entirely different. This was all pre-internet. Um, and you had your Friday deadlines. You had to get the stories in before 5 or whatever. So there was always kind of like a fence around you. You knew where the edges of the field were. But with the advent of the internet and with the popularity of things like podcasts, there's no boundaries to any of this now. And I forget what was the percentage you had, John, of the number of people who rely on podcasts and the internet to get their news versus traditional media. It was a
I
big number.
That's the number one place where people are getting it now. Digital media.
Digital,
Yeah.
social media, even social media, very much so.
I've got some crazy
Yeah.
stats here, social media. So indulge me for a second, and then I'll be quiet. Um, so in 2025, approximately 584 million people worldwide are expected to listen to podcasts, and the global podcast market is projected to reach a value of $39.63 billion. It's incredible. The number of listeners by the end of 2025. Yeah, there is the 584.1 million people. That's just incredible. And the total podcasts, I think there are going to be, according to the survey, 4.52 million podcasts available worldwide and 487,200 new shows launched in just the past 3 months. So you talk about influence. That's incredible. And why? I think that's one of the things we'd love to talk to you about, Lisa. Why are these so popular? And I think a lot of it kind of harkens back to the days of old radio before TVs were in everyone's rooms. People would, listen to these great radio broadcasts as families, every week or every day, and then became a tradition. This is
Sure.
probably as close as you could get to that, except it's more directed, and it's driven in large part by commercial interests. So,
Well, that's true. And
yeah.
and and formats are as varied as you can come up with, right? It can be long form storytelling like Serial, that podcast that came out, a true crime podcast that came out, I guess in the early mid 2000s.
Right.
changed the conversation on podcasts again, right? Because it was week to week. They didn't dump all the episodes at once, and the story was developing, and it was journalism that was happening too. Versus Bill Simmons, who was podcasting way before, in sports, anybody else who just their long form conversations with athletes and actors and you name it.
His podcast is one of my two favorites, Bill Simmons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's like three guys just talking to each other, no guests, right? Sometimes three girls talking to each other, no guests. And then there are some where people just talk with no one. They just say stuff, So
Mm-hmm.
and some of it is traditional, like a talk show where there's a guest promoting a book, and then the next guest is a politician, and the next guest is an expert on drones. I don't know, so
Yeah.
Well, there's very little price to entry, right? I mean, you just, set up your phone and there you're off, right? And so
right.
that's how you get to these, what is it? What was that? 4.25 million, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
One of the ways this was drawn to my attention too was all the recent controversy over Jimmy Kimmel getting pulled from the air and the number of viewers he had every night, and the same thing with Stephen Colbert. And they were topping out between like 2.5 million to 3 million a night. Um, but if you look at Joe Rogan, his WTF, no, he's not W. No,
He's Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan
yeah, the Joe
experience, I
Rogan
believe.
experience. That's correct.
Yes. Goes on for
He
three
was
hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was topping out at 8 million. I mean,
yeah,
you talk about exposure, that's just incredible.
he has the most listeners of any podcast.
And remember, he went to video very early on, if I'm not mistaken,
Did.
right? Right. And then again, a lot easier to find, and it's not like they're doing anything. They're just dudes sitting around, you know.
Let me ask you a question, Lisa, and Jeff as well. I mean, why are there so many podcasts? I mean, I guess we've kind of talked about that. It's easy. It's clearly popular. That's, I think, fairly straightforward. What makes a good podcast, though? Why is Joe Rogan number one in listeners? What makes a good I mean, I would think some sense of topicality, if that's even a word. Uh,
Yeah,
a good sense of humor. Jeff, I know you love Conan's, for example.
I
Yes.
do. I
Uh,
do. I do
what
love Conan
what
show.
makes a good podcast?
I think it's authenticity,
Yeah.
right? Like I think for Rogan, Marin, Conan, I can't speak to the smartless guys. And I mean, they are who they are, but and I guess Amy Poehler's is doing quite well too. But
Yeah, it
Uh,
is. I just
it,
saw that. Yeah.
yeah. And they are who, you feel like you know them.
yeah.
And that's why well, my new favorite podcast is called I've Had It. Do you know this?
No. Oh, tell.
I've had it. Two women born and raised in Oklahoma City. One was raised by a very evangelical family, and the other was raised by non-evangelical family. And they are
Huh.
profane. They absolutely hate our current president. They are absolutely authentic. They tell it like it is. And the show starts off where, what have you had it with? And it can be really petty or it can be something monumental. And I saw the video clips on social media before the election. And then they started to like just get into my feed more and more. And then I started to actually listen to the podcast. I would never have found them if they hadn't had that social media presence. But they are who they are. They
Yeah.
are the amount of profanity and the special names that they have for our current president, I'm not saying here. So anyway,
I think that podcast is one of my personal favorites. They are truly iconic on the planet. Thank you
right.
for all of your work, people.
Yeah. And that was Gelman, our producer, by the way, who
Thank you, Kurt.
is, along with my other daughter, they are the two people that introduced me to my favorite podcast, number one ahead of Bill Simmons, My Favorite Murder.
Oh,
Oh,
that's an
Yeah,
excellent
that one,
one.
Lisa.
yes. I know that one. She's a
Jason,
comedian, I believe.
pardon me?
One of the hosts, I think, is a comedian.
Oh, I mean, Gelman
Karen
Wayne.
Kilgariff. Yes.
Yes, yes, right. She's got her own separate podcast that's very funny.
Oh,
If
really?
They're coming to
yes,
Pasadena
yes.
in a month or so to do their podcast live.
Really? Okay. Wow. Well,
Oh yeah, so that's another part of the business model, you guys. Jeff, when you're asking why do it, A, you can make money. Hello,
You
right?
can,
You know,
yes.
you can with the ads, especially on YouTube, it's a lot I'm making air quotes easier versus the audio only ads.
mhm.
But the live events, I've now paid money to see the 538 podcast done live at the
Mm.
92nd Street Y. I went to the King Theater in Brooklyn to see the Pod Save America Boys live. I went to a taping in Brooklyn at the Bell House to see Dan Pashman do the Sporkful, which is a very good food podcast, live. And then there's merch. I have two Mark Maron t-shirts and a Cat Ranch mug.
Wow.
So ads, you sell ads. We need to take notes, Jeff.
I
Need to,
This
actually
is
have
your
been. It seems
business
current
model,
on
guys.
that.
You're in the comms business. Let's
No,
go. Yeah.
you
well,
know, it's incredible. And you know what you were talking about, John, you know, what makes these people attractive. I agree. They've got to be authentic. They've got to be and sometimes controversial, have really edgy opinions like Joe Rogan. You never know what angle he's going to come from. Funny is always a good thing. There's one now with Jason Bateman, Will Arnett,
oh,
and
smart
Smartless.
Smartless and Sean
Yes.
Hayes,
and
And
which
Sean
is
Hayes, yes.
excellent, excellent.
Oh,
And then you know there's a show on TV now, only Murders in the Building, which is
right,
based on
yeah.
podcasting. So
right,
it's a phenomenon, and if you're not utilizing it or taking advantage of it, I think you're
right.
missing
I've
the.
I've made a huge case to at Edelman clients. They want to be on podcasts. I said, you know what would be equally as effective for you, rather than, if you're a brand and you're not have an actual authentic story or an author or an expert, it's pretty difficult, to get somebody on a podcast. And I say the underwriting, like on NPR, the underwriting messages for Fresh Air or the podcast versions, right, of all those shows, it's actually pretty affordable. And if the host does the read, then the chances of you skipping through it might not be as high. I actually paid $5 a month to get WTF Plus, where there were no ads. And now that the podcast's over, they're like, well, for $3, you can have access to the archives. I'm thinking about it.
Okay, so Jeff, our homework is
Hmm?
put together an ad sales plan. Okay, right?
Yes. All right, that's
For
on.
event and come up with some merch. Gelman, I'm assigning the merch to you because you're the most creative among us. Okay,
Incredible.
you like that? All right, so Jeff, I am not here to self promote, but we need to put some context on why Lisa was talking about books.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I heard there's this new book out called Julia's Angels. I
I've,
can't
ne-
remember who wrote that one.
I've never heard of it. Never.
Yeah, no, John has a new book out called Julia's Angels. Fascinating story. And I'm sure probably a lot of you, I would hope a lot of you are aware of the old uh, Skakel murders back in Greenwich, Connecticut. How many years ago now? 40?
50 years ago
50 years ago.
this month. 50 years ago this month, Hallows Eve of 1975.
Very, very controversial.
Very.
The Skakels, some of the richest people in Greenwich, Connecticut, when all this happened, it was, just shocking. And eventually Michael Skakel, his conviction was overturned.
Was
So
he a Kennedy? Like related to the
he's a
Kennedy
Kennedy cousin,
First,
Kennedy cousin?
first cousin. Yeah, not
First
like
cousin.
cousin.
first cousin, but by marriage.
Right. Well,
Yes.
that was one of the first true crime
Yeah.
things, right? I mean, you could sort of imagine a Dateline, a 2020,
Oh yeah.
yeah. It's primetime live.
There have been multiple documentaries, one TV movie, which was based on the first book on this, which was by Dominic Dunn. And that was before Michael Skakel was ever even accused, at least publicly, right? So, all right. So Lisa, this is your first time on this grand podcast. There is a tradition here that I like to have a prop. I like to bring props. So here's my prop. Here's my book. And yes, Jeff is right. It is called Julia's Angels. Thank you, Lisa. The subhead is Chasing One Last Chance at Justice nearly 50 years later. So the I've always been fascinated by this murder. The Kennedy angle. I mean, that's what part of why it became part of pop culture. Right. Documentaries, movies, countless books, websites, on and on. But that's not why I wrote the book, really. I mean, that's kind of been done. I mean, so many books have been written on this. What inspired me to write the book, and I want to be clear with those of you who are saying, "Oh gosh, is this just about a book promotion?" We do want to talk about why books specifically, why podcasting is especially good for books, right? But the short version is that what inspired me to write this was there was a decision by the Connecticut Supreme Court in the year 2018. So whatever that was, 38 years after the murder, they vacated Michael Skakel's conviction. The case had not resulted in a conviction for 27 years. He was convicted in 2002, served 11 years in prison, was let out in 2013 on a technicality, and then the lawyers kind of went back and forth. And then in 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court vacated his conviction, meaning he was out. He was free man, which prompted the prosecutors to appeal the case to the United States Supreme Court. And so I looked at that in 2018. I said, you got to be kidding me. I mean, this is just when you never thought a legal case and situation could become even more off the rails and interesting, right? And so I started writing at that point, and I wrote a fictional story that is which is great because it enables you to take creative license and so forth. And again, I didn't want to write, there was no reason to write the umpteenth book on what happened. So I wrote a fictional story exploring all the different angles, and the protagonist is a New York Times reporter who's looking into the story. Same protagonist from my first novel, by the way, just older. But I offer intermittent reminders between chapters of what's happening in real life with the appeal to the Supreme Court. But I tell a fictional story. So, but I wanted to do some good here. I wanted to do some good. I didn't want to just, the family's been through enough. The 50-year anniversary of this is coming up, which will very likely, I would assume, prompt media calls. But the victim, Martha Moxley, her mother, had become very famous in her own right over the years because she was always so happy to do interviews. You would think if your 15-year-old daughter had been murdered with a golf club in this horrific incident, the last thing you want to do is do an interview, one would think, right? But she was always so open to doing them because she felt like when somebody would do a story on the murder or just her daughter in general, it helped keep her daughter's memory alive. And she became a darling of the media. And she just died this past Christmas Eve, actually. And so the book is really a tribute. The book is a tribute to her for the absolute class with which she comported herself over time in the most difficult of situations. But it's also a salute to journalists, to journalism, and to journalists, because the name of the book is Julia's Angels. The Angels, Julia is her, by the way. I've changed all the names.
Changed the names, yeah.
The Angels part, she always called these reporters. I'm talking about there was a group of them that followed the story from the beginning, and they stuck by her for decades.
Right.
She called them her angels. And so that's why it's Julia's Angels. It's a salute to her, and it's a salute to the journalists who followed the story all these years. And it's a salute to journalism in general at a time when I believe journalism could use a little love, right? Trust in
Oh, yeah.
media lower at any point in history, right about the point at which we could use it the most to
Right.
keep power in check, which is one of the responsibilities of the mainstream press. So
Yeah.
I felt like it was a good time to kind of uphold media in general.
Well, if I was your book publicist at your publisher, this is what I would think about this in a couple of ways, which is
This is purely hypothetical, right?
purely hypothetical. They're the true crime podcasts. I don't listen to them enough, but I suspect there were certain ones that possibly take guests. And the fact that yours is fiction, but the whole sort of true crime explosion probably started with this case, I'm gonna guess, right?
Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, the Manson murders was and what was Helter Skelter, possibly,
Uh,
but that was not fictional, right? And then you sort of have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was like, what if it didn't happen that way, right? So anyway, so I think if I was a publicist and I had access and the other key thing about pitching podcasts as an author, because a lot of authors who self-publish or sometimes there's no big publicity department have to do some things themselves. You have to listen. Do they take guests? What kind of guests do they take authors? So that's an important piece. So on the true crime side, I think that's an exercise that I would have to do if I was working on this book. The other thing I would think about is it is a media story, ultimately, to your point, John, that the
yeah.
the reporters, now whether they were TMZ, I mean, I don't even think TMZ existed when the case first happened, but these multiple turns, probably People was probably one of the big ones, right, on this case, and maybe People at the New York Times who covered, I don't, Washington Post maybe just say like it belongs on the podcasts about media, and there's a bunch of them, right? So one is Dylan Byers, and his is very, he's at Puck. There's Peter Kafka, and they're covering the media business, but you could argue that the tabloidization of news starts with this stuff, goes to OJ, and then on and on and on, right?
Mm,
And in the timeline, this was before the O.J. Simpson,
yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
the murder was before 19 years before OJ, but this murder, the conviction happened right after OJ. In fact,
really,
Mark
oh, yeah,
Mark Furman wrote the cop from the OJ case. He wrote Murder in Brentwood right after that.
right.
But then 2 years later, he wrote Murder in Greenwich based on this case. And they were really kind of on top of each other in the mid to late 90s.
So I'd argue the theme is this is what happens when news becomes the tabloids. And the
Mm-hmm.
tabloid culture is what made our current president very famous, right? The whole Marla Maples thing. So the tabloidization of news, the emergence of things like TMZ, the emergence of that Dateline went from very serious news to
Yeah,
nothing but true crime
yeah,
because the audience wants it. Not quite sure why, but from the perspective of people who cover the media as media, and to your point, there's less, do you know that there's 7 PR people for every 1 journalist?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That
We've actually quoted that.
we have used on prior podcasts. That
Yes.
I think one of the things we said was that's the sure sign of the apocalypse.
Absolutely.
No,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
PR people, of
Yeah,
course.
of course. Of course. But I think that's to me is a theme
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
you don't get, and this is, all of the stuff that happened in Hollywood with the Blue Dahlia and all that other stuff, like that was sort of the first go around. But this is mass media now because the internet came in the middle of all of this too, right? Between the end of the Moxley case, or in the middle of the Moxley case, and in the middle end of the OJ case, right? So I think, things just amplified, and on social media, things that make you angry or get excited, that gets shared. It has more virality. So the podcast thing, the fact that there are so many true crime podcasts means that there's an audience for it, and that there are more than one podcast about the media tells you something.
Yeah.
And then I think just, I don't know enough about podcasts that talk to fiction writers,
Yeah, I
John.
was going to ask you, what about non-true crime? Why are those good for uh
Right. I
book?
mean, I think nonfiction is always going to be a lot easier because
Yeah,
you don't have to have read the book, but the subject you might be interested in,
good point.
right? Right. Like and I remember having been a book publicist for fiction writers, unless there was a hook in the novel's plot that
Mhm.
had larger, implications, it was hard. And that's why book reviews then are was very important. There are less and less book reviews happening. You may
Yeah.
have read this. The Associated Press has pretty much gotten rid of any book reviews.
Oh, I did not know that. Interesting.
Yes, and I believe at Vanity Fair they just got rid of all their critics. Their film critics, I think they're book critics.
Oh man.
Yeah, remember, the New York Times would do a daily book review,
Oh
and
yeah.
not anymore. So it's only Sundays.
I
Okay.
heard the Secretary of Defense is getting rid of all of his critics now too. So
Yes, that's correct. That is correct. So for fiction, I think it's this. I mean, in some ways, is your book set in Connecticut?
It is. It's not called Connecticut. Well, it is called Connecticut. It's just not called Greenwich. I
Right.
inserted Cheviot Hills, which is the neighborhood in Los Angeles where I grew up.
Oh,
But
you
anything
may
not Greenwich is called what it is.
you'd be amazed there are probably associated maybe with the Hartford Current or
Yeah,
other Connecticut media, there's podcasts that happen, right? Because,
that's a
y-
good point.
and who knows, I don't know, but I do think even some of the reporters who followed this case, they themselves may have left the Daily News or the Post, or who knows, but that would be like you could say, well, I want to go on with so and so from the Post who covered this case,
Yeah,
and as a way to like pitch it.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
The guy, the reporter, it's really too bad he passed away. Gosh, maybe 10 years ago at this point. Um, his name is escaping me. Shame on me. But he, Len Levitt, Len
Oh.
Levitt actually wrote his own book called Conviction, all about the actual conviction of Michael Skakel. He he followed that case longer than anybody. He's the one who actually first wrote about it in the early '80s when it was cold, right? And he stayed on it all the way until the end. He had
Right.
a true crime website that he published after he left the daily reporting business. I think I want to say he was in Newsday for a long time. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I wish he was still around. I can think of some other people though
Yeah, sure.
that
Because I
that
think that's how it would, that's how you sort of make it, to your point, the angels being the journalists who didn't let the story die, So,
well,
and
let's say you're a I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
no, no, please.
Let's say you are let's take a step back from books. I want to be mindful of time as well. Let's say you're an IT services company or a software company or a consumer packaged goods company, right? Why is podcasting a good promotional channel for you, right? I mean, is it should you think about starting your own podcast? And if you do, how do you go about doing that?
Right.
Better to try and get your best people onto others' podcasts? What do
I
you think?
think what I currently am, well, now that I'm in business for myself, John and Jeff. I have a client, Callie Williams Yost. She is a work transformation expert, meaning she helps and started almost 30 years ago to help companies create high performance flexibility. P.S. Pre-pandemic, right?
Hmm.
Where how people, when, where, and how they work across places, spaces, and time. Meaning, you were in Los Angeles. I was in New York. If we had to work together, we had to figure out when is the best time so that you don't have to wake up at 3 in the morning and I don't have to stay at work until 9 o'clock. That flexibility in figuring that out, that is her job. There are, weirdly, a lot of podcasts that talk about the future of work, HR subject matter.
Hmm.
And she did one yesterday with a young man who is in commercial real estate in Chicago. He's from a family that's been in Chicago commercial real estate for over 100 years. And he's now created a podcast to promote himself and the family's business. And real estate is related to workplace, right? Because you have to go to if you go to an office.
Sure.
So the reason that we've had her do this is for the transcripts and for the clips. The transcripts for podcasts are important because we are now in the age of AI search, which means the large language models love earned media. They love it. They, other than hitting the paywall at the New York Times. So you ask ChatGPT to get you something from the New York Times, you're not getting it because they won't let them in. But when you get the podcast transcript, then, when you Google Callie Williams Yost, this podcast is going to come up in the little AI search. The other thing that's great about the video version, which we're doing here for a podcast, is you can make clips. And when she was on a recent podcast called The Future of Work, she put clips on her LinkedIn and she tagged the show, she tagged the host, and that sort of virtuous circle of, likes and audience crossover can happen. So that's why, and I've talked to for a restaurant client I've wanted to put him on Restaurant Business Podcast. He's not quite ready to do it yet. He wants a little bit more growth. But when I tell you there's like 3 dozen restaurant business podcasts, there are. So I think it's a little bit of building a brand. It's kind of fueling the search engine in an organic way, right? And
Hmm.
then it's giving you, especially if it's video, content for your social channels. Because, right, for this book, you know, and if you were to do these things, is that you'd probably want to do video podcasts where you can make clips and it can go on Instagram and, show the cover of the book and the whole thing, which you couldn't do on the radio, right?
Right.
Which is not to say that you shouldn't do radio anymore, but even local radio stations, if you're an Odyssey owned station, every show is a podcast. Like every hour on WBBM in Chicago is on a podcast. And I'm
Right.
thinking it's news. Wait a minute. Like it happened 3 hours ago. Why would I do that? People do. So so I think fiction is tricky if you find the right angle, or if I'm unaware of hundreds of fiction related podcasts, I don't know. I do know I went to HarperCollins and they have multiple podcasts that they produce themselves. And I know Scholastic Books does one for teachers and helping like figure out lesson plans and things like that.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So I don't know who your publisher is, but I would suggest if they haven't started doing their own podcast, they should.
I would agree. They are my publisher is iUniverse, which is a self-publishing company, but a humongous one. So I don't know. I mean, I'll check into it. But
Yes, sure.
Jeff, what do you think? I mean, I am learning a lot. I'm taking this in as an author, but also just as a practitioner of integrated marketing communications, right? Wait,
Yeah.
questions, comments, Jeff? What do you think?
I could just say my head is swimming. My head is swimming. This is nothing I could have ever even related to when I was younger. But now I see how powerful it is. And also, I think people relate if you're driving on a 3-hour trip in a car and listening to
Right.
music or whatever. Would you rather listen to music or maybe listen to a conversation about some subject matter you're really interested in? And I think a podcast goes more towards the second. I think people like to be included and to be involved in provocative conversation.
Learning something.
Yeah, yeah.
Learning something.
So, so I've certainly learned a lot from this conversation.
I'm
Have
going to blow your guys'
really different.
minds. Here's something that you're going to go, Lisa, oh my God, it's like covering City Hall, and here's a City Hall right next to it that you have to cover. The beauty of Substack. So so Jim Acosta, formerly of CNN,
Yeah.
left and has now got one of the most successful Substacks. And he basically does an interview show on his phone, Substack. And then I listen to it as a podcast. I have him on Substack too, but it's too hard for me to like do that versus just audio. I was
Yeah.
raised by people who loved radio, so that's probably why. But that's another platform. There's a lot of authors on Substack, just so you know.
I've heard of it. I know of it, but I don't know much about it.
It's the very fact that Jim Acosta, Derek Thompson left The Atlantic to start a Substack. This is a
Mm,
man who was getting cover stories at The Atlantic, and this is his home now.
mm,
Molly Jong Fast, who has a politics podcast, she left Vanity Fair and started a Substack. But she does video with Rick Wilson, politics, on
mm.
Substack together.
Yeah.
So another thing that, and
I'm
this is why my job is never boring, because I have to learn this stuff literally every week. So
well, the expertise and the passion come, racing through my phone, Lisa, and I'm sure anybody who listens to this would agree with that. Look at that smile.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We
Flowing through.
what's that?
It's flowing through her. She's
It is.
obviously energized by all this.
yeah.
And I am too, but
It's a
it's a
lot.
phenomenon.
It's a lot. And I hope I haven't confused your viewers. So,
No,
okay.
open minds. We like to, I think I want to be sensitive to time. I think we're
Sure.
getting to that point.
Yeah, we're at that point.
Lisa, one of the things, in addition to loving having a prop, we like to close with a couple of takeaways, helpful takeaways for a CMO or a chief communications officer. Or do you have any parting words of advice?
Mhm.
Whether you're in charge of marketing or communications for a software company or a publishing company or a restaurant, what are a couple of ideas that you can leave them with in terms of how they can leverage
I
pod?
Sure. I think the mistake that many brands or companies do is they keep things in silos. So the comms people are here,
Oh
and the
yeah.
people in charge of social media are here, and the people who are in charge of paid are over here. And what needs to happen is everybody's got to like work together,
Yeah.
because I get, and for Callie, right? So I get her on these podcasts, and then she and an assistant do the social content, and she uses AI to kind of like synthesize what she wants to say, but she goes back in and it makes it human, and that stuff goes up a lot faster. And I think the mistake, and she's not doing any paid push behind it. She is a trusted voice on LinkedIn. But when you are like, the PR is over here and the social posts have nothing to do with what the PR is doing, you are wasting your money on both.
100%. 100%. Um,
And traditional, like wanting to be on the Today Show, God bless, in this day and age versus on Bill Simmons or the I've Had It ladies, like where's the audience? The audience is lovely on the Today Show, but they've gone from, like you say, the Tonight Show or Jimmy Kimmel, it was like from 10 million to 1 million, and the audience wants the ability to control their consumption, podcasts, Substack, social
Mhm.
media, YouTube. They're in control. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. One thing I might add is stick with it, right? to me, it's not that different from the concept of producing executive thought leadership. And let's say you talk the CEO into doing one piece that you post somewhere or get it on the Forbes Technology Council or whatever. But if you do it once, you got to stick with it, right? And in my research, Jeff, one of the things that what'd you say, like 3 or 4 million podcasts, but there's really only about, at least according to my research, maybe 500,000 are estimated to be actively producing content.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So you're going to commit to it. You've got to keep it up, right?
I'm going to recommend a newsletter to you guys. It's called Sounds Profitable.
Ooh.
And a gentleman named Tom Webster, who was at Edison Research, and I'm sure, Jeff, that's where some of your stats came from, is Edison Research. But Tom is the most generous knowledge sharing expert on the business of podcasting that you will ever find. He does free webinars on the industry. He always has a sponsor like NPR or a research company, or at one point, the Pod Save America guys, Crooked Media. But Sounds Profitable kicks out a newsletter almost every day. And sometimes there's great stuff and useful stuff for me, sometimes there isn't. But I feel like, like anything else in our business, if you don't keep current, then you like, what? That's your job. And I agree with you, John, that if you start something, whether it's a regular posting on LinkedIn and then you drop off, that's a problem. And they're adjusting the algorithm every day. They've just messed with it again. And you wonder why is this thing from 2 weeks ago showing up? It's because they know it didn't get a lot of views.
Mm.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Luckily, we've been keeping it up at our modest level pretty religiously every 2 weeks in the almost year since we started. And
It's great.
what you're saying is I think fuel for the importance of keeping that up.
Yes.
Yeah,
Jeff,
huge.
any takeaways for the audience, Jeff?
I mean, I'm definitely blinded with science right now, and anyone who tells you they understand this stuff is lying. We can understand the messaging and the motivation and all that beneath this, but all of these things are changing so rapidly. It boggles the mind, and you have to stay ahead of it. So
Right.
that's something I take out of this um, very, very seriously. And I think, as a tool for the communicator, podcasts are becoming more and more and more important. So
Well, and I'll leave you with this. There's been a couple of articles. New York Magazine's Vulture did it. Instead of the traditional press junket, it's much more the the untraditional, the chicken dinner date thing, the English thing. They want celebrities need to do those shows almost versus the Tonight Show or the morning shows because
Mhm.
they're reaching their audiences more directly. And like YouTube shows, podcasts, Substacks, they have to, especially in an age where what is the CEO of Netflix, like his the biggest competitor of Netflix is sleep. There is distraction. It's like if I'm
Yeah.
like the commissioner of the NBA, I would be worried about all this other stuff.
Uh,
well said.
let's assume they are. I would assume that Adam
That's
Silver
right.
is worried about that kind of stuff.
I think, and I have to say, the NBA has an excellent social media game and an approach to getting the players to be their
I,
own brand ambassadors and all of that. So,
I agree with that. I personally think they're the best professional sports league, maybe for all marketing. Certainly, the community stuff they do is very impressive. I don't know. I mean, that's perhaps maybe a different podcast, Jeff.
that's right. I think so too.
Yeah. But anyway, Lisa, thank you so much. It
I'm
is
so
great,
excited to see you again, John.
so
Nice
great
to see you, Jeff.
to hang out with
Great
you,
to see
learn
you.
from you, and just catch up in general. Yes, we had some time to catch up in the green room before this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
Jeff, you want to
Anytime.
Oh, yeah. Hey, we may have you back. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, you better be careful.
Yes,
Jeff,
Sealed your fate.
can you
I'll-
do our
I'll
traditional?
do the wrap up. Okay, so here's a little ad for us. You know, we're we're not the smartest looking guys, but we're pretty smart. We know how to maneuver around these things. So if you have a need for anything communications related, public relations related, marketing related, come and talk to us. If nothing else, you'll get a good conversation out of it, and maybe we can provide a little wisdom along the way. Also, follow us. If you like this, hit like. Follow us on all the different social channels. We're on every one of them. So you'll hear again from us soon. But again, thank you for hanging with us. 1 year into this, a little bit more than 1 year into this, it's pretty amazing. And we keep on growing, and I think we're better than we used to be, but we can always get better. So we love all of you. I love you,
Always.
John. I barely know you, Lisa, but I love you too. And I
There's
love
the
John's
book.
book.
Yes.
Buy my book.
Excellent.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, very welcome. Thank you
Nailed
for
it, you
having me.
guys.
See y'all later.